Hey, everybody. Is everybody out of the waiting room yet? Yeah, almost everybody's out of the waiting room now. Welcome to our monthly Summit Investors Help Night. The topic tonight, as I assume you all know, is commercial and apartment properties. And we have a panel of folks that I'm going to introduce you to here in a moment that will be answering all your questions, because I'm not going to be answering all your questions because I'm more of a residential girl, although I'm slowly getting converted over to the idea that maybe commercial and apartments might be better passive investments for retirement. I know we have some new people here tonight, so I'm just going to go through my usual quick introduction about what we do here. This whole thing started out as a Facebook group that was requested by people who attended the National Real Estate Summit that the Ohio Real Estate Investors Association holds every year here in Cincinnati in November. It was basically kind of a, man, we only get to see each other once a year. Isn't there some other online way we can get together? And so we started a Facebook group and said, hey, it's only going to be people helping people. We're not going to pitch deals here. We're not going to allow spam. We're not going to talk about, we're not going to pitch anybody's education. And within 3 weeks, it became, well, hey, could we do it online too? Vina, take care of that. So yeah, that's what happened next. And we always have just a volunteer panel of experts. We always have the opportunity to pre-submit questions and then open up the floor for questions. So if you do have a question, raise your hand. You know how to do that in Zoom, right? Everybody's been on Zoom for 4 years now. We should know how to raise our hands in Zoom, but if not, don't worry about it. We will put the instructions on how to raise your hand in the chat right now. Want to remind everybody the 2024 summit. Oh, this is not the right slide. I already told you guys this last month. The 2024 summit is coming up on October 31st through November 3rd here in Cincinnati. We've got about 70% of our topics booked. And that wasn't the thing that I wanted to tell you. The thing I wanted to tell you was I talked to the Great Wolf Lodge on Monday, and the room block is already 50% full. So
what?
I know, right? You're coming. Well, people have started like booking it the year before, because it always, like last year, I think it was completely full by August. So you're coming to the summit, make sure you get your room at the Great Wolf. I mean, there's other hotels around, but it's nice to be able to stumble back to your room at 2 o'clock in the morning after talking about real estate all night and not have to stumble across the street to do that. So the contact information and the coupon code to get our room rate is on the website at oreaconvention.com. Early bird price is $167. That's about half of what it ends up at when we get closer to the event. We will give 2 seats away at 9 p.m. to somebody who is here. And I have an ask for everybody. I kind of have this same ask every year. The summit always has a theme, right? It always has like a 1-sentence, pithy, quick theme that captures the idea of, it's community, it's financial freedom, it's deal making, it's education, and I ran out of ideas for themes like 15 years ago, so now I just crowdsource it. Now don't put your idea in the chat, okay? Because I'm about to tell you what the rest of the crowdsourcing thing is. The person who comes up with the theme we end up using gets the entire summit for free, including VIP tickets and 3 free nights at Great Wolf Lodge. So I'll be launching this contest out to everybody next week, but think about that. Something that you go, well, I would come to an event that had this theme. Actually, last year's winner was Steve Smullen, who is one of our guest panelists tonight. So just think about that and send it to askvina@gmail.com. Askvina@gmail.com. And hopefully one of you guys will win 3 free nights at the hotel during the event. Okay, so this is another topic this month that I'm not really somebody who's going to be able to answer a lot of questions here. So I'm just going to be monitoring the chat and helping to, I don't know, smooth the conversation maybe, because we're talking about commercial and apartment investing, and haven't done a whole bunch of that. We do have some special guest members of the community who are also here to answer any of your questions. And I'm going to tell you what their areas of expertise are in case it generates some questions in your brain. First of all, we got Mr. Anthony Chara. Most of you guys know him. He's probably the most famous apartment educator in the country. And in my opinion, he is the best apartment educator in the country. In fact, I literally never recommend anybody else other than Anthony. The common comment about Anthony was, man, I learned more from him in 90 minutes than I learned in 3 days going to this super expensive thing I did. Anthony is joining us at the summit this year for the first time in 3 years. It's been way too long, but he will be educating us on the current apartment market this year and telling us where the deals are and what we should be doing. Our second guest panelist is Mr. Scott Ellsworth, who is the 2024 president of the Ohio Real Estate Investors Association. He also is a longtime apartment investor. In fact, if we get a minute, maybe he can tell the story of the pretty young lady who knocked on his door with gifts the other day trying to buy his apartment buildings because he wouldn't respond to their mail. And he also, within the last 3 years, made a foray into the office building market. Right in time, Scott. Boy, you just could not have picked a better time to get into office space. Next up, we have Suzanne Lewick, who is from South Carolina and who has made herself a little niche in self-storage units. We also have, and this is going to get confusing because I'm about to name 2 Steve S's. All right, so pay attention. Steve Stackman is from Ohio and does all sorts of real estate investing, but particularly I thought what was interesting about him for tonight is he likes to buy little small pieces of real estate that have a business involved in them, things like car washes and, you know, it's the rich dad poor dad thing, right, Steve? That's what Robert Kiyosaki recommends to get started: laundromats, car washes, little businesses like that. And finally, we have Steve Smullen, who you guys will recognize if you have been here for the last 3 months. He specializes in distressed assets of any sort, so bank-owned, government-owned, things like that, but has done a lot of commercial deals during his life as a distressed asset investor. Also does residential though. So he's agnostic about the property class. He just wants motivated sellers is the basic thing. So between these guys, they can probably answer just about any question you have. If you want to raise your hand up, I'm going to read a couple of questions that we got prior to the meeting tonight, and then we will roll into any questions that you all have. So Anthony, this first question I think is right down your alley, although anybody who feels like they have anything to say about this is certain to do it. The question is, Can you talk about the compression in cap rates and the effect that higher interest rates is having? I'm hearing stories that we should see a tidal wave of foreclosures as apartment buyers who made big mistakes by buying at a 3 cap in 2020 see their loans reset at 7 or 8% in 2025. Do you believe that this is true, or will something else happen?
Yeah, I'm not so sure there's going to be a tidal wave, but have definitely been a lot of foreclosures already. There's more that are on the horizon. The main reason for that is there were a lot of people that bought into the fact that, hey, if I buy this apartment building and I go in and I renovate it and put all this extra money into the property, I can then raise the rents $200 or $300 per unit per month. That means the value of the property is going to go through the roof. And then when I'm done with it, I'm going to refinance out of it. And I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to make my investors a lot of money. Well, here's what happened in reality, because some people didn't see the warning signs. They didn't see the fact that interest rates were going to go through the roof because inflation was going to drive up in interest rates. And the Fed was printing all kinds of money, which also caused a lot of the inflation that we're now experiencing, plus coming out of COVID and all the supply chain interruptions. So it was the perfect storm of events that caused the Fed to decide to raise interest rates, because things were just actually going a little too hotly after we got out of COVID. And so what happened was you had all these investors that looked at their bridge loan interest rate and their takeout interest rate, and they assumed, they underwrote it for a 2 to 3 year period, that everything was going to stay flat, even though all the warning signs were that everything was going to jump up. So what ended up happening to a lot of these owners and operators is all of a sudden their bridge loan that was at 6 or 7% jumped up to 9, 10, 11%. Their takeout loan that they had underwritten that they'd be able to get a loan at 4-ish%, give or take a little bit, jumped to about 7 to 8%. And so what happened was, especially since the bridge loans that they were using, and the bridge loan is basically there to bridge it from the purchase to the refinance. That's why it's a bridge loan. And they didn't think that interest rates were going to go up. Well, bridge loans are adjustable. And so what ended up happening is all this extra money that these operators had set aside to do their renovations all went towards paying the mortgage to keep the mortgage current so that they wouldn't lose the properties. Well, there was also some investors out there that, quite frankly, potentially just ripped off their investors too. There was a gentleman down in Houston that was foreclosed on 3,200 units about a year ago. And one of the reasons he was foreclosed on, what we all thought, was that he got hung up just like a lot of people did, right? He didn't account for everything jumping up, and all of his extra money went to paying off the rise in the interest rate on the bridge loan. Well, a lot of his investors, there's over 120 lawsuits against him now, basically said that all the extra money they gave him before interest rates went up never even went into the property. And so he just hopped on a plane and left the country, and now people are trying to track him down. And this has happened not just to him, but a lot of other people. And a lot of these foreclosures you haven't even heard about. There's been dozens of foreclosures in the Dallas market, the Houston market, the New York market, and there are going to be more. But one of the reasons I think it's quiet is because there's so many people out there that are willing to take on some of these deals, that a lot of these deals, as soon as they're foreclosed on, somebody comes in and buys it up from the bank, and you never even hear about it going to auction.
Are they buying them at lower prices than?
Absolutely. It started a few years ago with the office market, with everybody shutting down all the space that they needed with their office market, with their office space because of COVID. So a lot of the office foreclosures started in 2020, late 2020, 2021. Now it's gone into the apartment markets because of the rising interest rates. And so, as an example, there was an office building in downtown Baltimore that I think was sold a few years ago for something like $67 million, and somebody bought it for less than 20. And you're going to hear that about apartments as well, too. A lot of them aren't public knowledge, but yeah, the banks are taking a haircut. But most of the haircut is coming from the money that the investors have put in from their equity. So the banks might be taking a little bit of a haircut, but so far there still doesn't seem to be enough pain in the market for them to take bigger haircuts.
And Vina, I will say I do a lot of IRA valuations of syndication investments through IRAs and 401ks. And so I know a lot of syndicators out there and talk to a lot of investors. All the investors, well, I don't say all, but they're getting capital calls. They're saying we've got to have more money so we can pay the bills, so we can keep it afloat. So you've got investors who are diluting what their return is just plummeting because they're having to throw this money in to try to keep it afloat. And then the question is, you're going to keep it afloat for what? Are you keeping afloat so that you can get a tidal wave on top of you? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. But a lot of the investors are in it. They're just hoping. I mean, I've had investors I've talked to of 100 grand in a deal, and I've already written it off because they don't feel like they're going to get it back. So it's tough.
Adding to what Anthony was just saying, there's a lot more defaults taking place than are actually showing up in the legal recordings. The $32 million default down in Texas, and I think that was late last year that took place. But anyway, it was 4 multifamily properties down there. That didn't actually go through the foreclosure process. There's $46 million in office property just a couple of blocks from where I'm sitting right now that didn't go through the foreclosure process. When they have these great big giant loans, there's no personal liability on these signatures unless there's they've fallen into the bad boy carve outs. They did something wrong. They broke the law or violated the terms of the loan. Just a default is not a bad boy stress situation. And so what a lot of these big borrowers are doing is handing the lender the keys. There's nothing to fight about. We're not going to recover from this situation. Let's not waste the attorney fees. Here, take it. And so when that happens, when you have a deed in lieu of foreclosure, you don't have foreclosure, you don't have filing. And a lot of the defaults that are taking place, that's the way they're working through the system. So they're not showing up in the foreclosure filings that I made a living off of for decades. I'm finding them through other media that these are taking place.
Yeah, does anybody else want to know how one finds out that the bank got the keys back to a property? Like, that sounds like an interesting opportunity if you could know that. How would you know that?
You network with the bank folks who are in that area. You gotta be out there. You got to make it intentional. You've got to meet them. You've got to talk to them.
Yeah, I have a commercial mortgage broker down in Dallas that can give me the entire list for the state of Texas on the ones that have gone into default. Or about to go into default, which sometimes you can work out deals with the owners before they go into default and potentially put yourself, get the deal in such a way that you put yourself and or your investors ahead of their current investors in order to get repaid before them.
Yeah, when I used to work at US Bank, our loss mitigation department, when someone was getting into trouble with a commercial loan, they didn't want it to get into trouble. They would try to place it with someone else, coerce maybe the seller or the owner to sell that property to another person in our bank that we done business with and our private banking knew could handle the deal. So a lot of times this stuff never hits the market.
One of the things that Steve S. Oh, I guess there's 2 Steve S. So Steve Smallin said that, I mean, when they turn these, like, here's the keys, what happens to the investors? There's nothing. They're not getting anything. I mean, unless they are, you have to tell me, Steve or Anthony, if you've seen it, the investors basically are just out of luck, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm having trouble hearing Scott. I don't know your volume.
Yeah, if Scott
Yeah.
can turn his microphone up, that would be helpful.
Yeah, you were fine, and then all of a sudden you were faint. His question was, when the syndicator turns the keys over to the bank, what happens to all the investors who had hundreds of thousands in cash into it? Are they just SOL?
Yes.
Yep. For the most part, yes, unless they want to file a lawsuit and try and recover some that way. Most of them, unless there's some type of fraud or something that shady that happened with the money that didn't go where it was supposed to go, they really don't have a lot of recourse. But we also know we're in a litigious society in America, and people can sue you for anything and any reason, even if you didn't do anything wrong, and that could still cost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect yourself and your reputation.
You know, and if you're a non-accredited investor, you have invested in a 506 B or not a C, you actually stand a better chance if there's anything to recover of recovering something or going after personal assets. But if you're an accredited investor, you're assumed to have known better, and your chances of recovery are less. But then on the other hand, you can probably afford a better attorney to go after it. And Scott, I'd love to chat with you a little bit about some strategies that I'm working on. Some of those situations, I believe I've come up with a formula to help possibly save those limited partner level investors, those self-directed IRA investors, possibly salvage something. So I'd love to bounce those ideas off you and see if that can. Now you went silent.
Okay, so let's go to Stephen, who has patiently had his hand up now for better than 10 minutes, and then we'll go back to the pre-submitted questions. Stephen Ozier.
Yes, good afternoon. Well, good evening. My question was, what's the best way to find funding for multi-units?
Most of the time, you could either go to a mortgage broker that have 200 to 300 sources that they can access, depending on the type of deal. Not one size doesn't fit all. Or you can go to local banks. You can go to Wells Fargo, Chase in your own market. You can go to smaller banks like credit unions, savings and loans, small regional banks right there in your own area. And I would actually check out most of them, because again, all of them have different loan products, and those loan products change as well. So you could go in one day and one bank, let's say Bank A has really high interest rates and short amortization periods, and B has lower interest rates and longer amortization periods. A month later, they could switch. So you want to check with them on a daily basis.
Well, and I
maybe not daily, but
from what I hear, different banks also have different preferences. Like especially the little banks, some of them are like, oh no, we only want to do things under 20 units. And other ones are like, no, we really like to invest in retail property. So I think you might find yourself working with different banks in different situations simply because they have their preferences.
And tagging on to what Anthony said, at Anthony's monthly lunch networking last month or the month before, he had his commercial loan broker as a featured speaker. I put together a class that I teach how to massively boost your credibility with sellers and buyers and bankers and brokers. And one of the things that you have to take into account when you're considering doing what was just mentioned was, don't go for the one that's charging you the cheapest points or the cheapest rate. You've got to pay the freight and do business with somebody that has a high level of integrity and professionalism. Pay the freight, because the worst thing that can happen to you in your deal is to be shopping it all over the place. And you call up a bank and they said, yeah, I heard about that already. It's been neglected. It's been turned down by that one and that one. I'm just not going to waste any time on it. So you really need to align yourself with good quality people, and you need to pay those people what they're worth. And if you don't do that, you're going to end up with discounted service, and you stand a very good chance of having your deal shopped and not getting funded.
Okay, David.
Yeah, hey, thank you. Thanks everybody for showing up. This is a topic I'm interested in. I have two questions. On the distressed properties that we're talking about, I know a lot of life insurance companies invest in commercial real estate. What happens to those companies, and especially if you're investing with the life insurance companies, you know, what could happen in that case?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So life insurance companies, as I mentioned, do
Yeah.
invest in commercial real estate. So if these properties were to lose a lot of value, what happens to these insurance companies? Are going to lose their assets or their investments. I'm just if you don't know the answer, then you know I can move on to the next question.
Is,
Yeah,
is the question about like, so I have like a universal policy with this bank that's paying me some rate of interest, and now, or the, sorry, the insurance company, and now some huge deal of theirs has gone belly up. What happens to me as the person who's the policy holder, or what happens to the insurance company?
Is
Yeah,
your question about life insurance company insolvency?
yeah, because you know, you talk to these companies, oh yeah, we never go bankrupt and so forth. I'm just kind of curious, you know, in the past, or what could happen to these companies. So
Yeah, just
the-
like the banks, that is a possibility that they could become insolvent, but they have a lot of regulations behind them as well too. We've only had one insurance company loan. Of course, we made our payments, so we didn't have to worry about them going insolvent. But if they have too many loans out on one particular asset that then goes belly up, they could potentially become insolvent, yes. And could that create a problem for your life insurance policy if you were to die around that same time? Yes. But I don't know if anybody here is an expert on that. Certainly, like I said, there are so many more regulations around insurance companies to make sure that they actually have adequate reserves in case there are claims of some sort that they need to pay out. So I don't know if it's probably more likely that a bank is going to go out of business before the insurance company.
I would, first off, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on the subject by any stretch of the imagination. And in 35 years, I've never done a deal with an insurance company, not for lack of trying. But one of the important things to know is that insurance companies don't have the same rules. They have a whole separate set of rules from banks, and then there's the state bank level of regulation, national bank of regulate book of regulations. International banks have a layer of regulations. Insurance companies have a whole different set of rules. And so their loss factors for real estate investment are not going to be the same as you can look up with any bank. I don't know if you know that, but you can actually look up and see just about any bank's balance sheet online, which is something that if you're going to borrow, you might look at. Is the lender even capable? Sometimes a couple years back, were taking all the loan applications and not making any loans. They didn't want the public to know that they weren't capable of making any loans. So they kept taking applications and finding reasons to reject them. That's when I learned to look up the bank and find out if they can even do the deal. But David, an answer to your question would be do business with the larger, more reputable companies. If you're doing your insurance business with Bob's Insurance and whatever, you stand a much higher risk of them being in a position to default on you.
okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
If we remember 2008, AIG was
Yep.
kind of a cornerstone of that whole crisis with the mortgage-backed securities and the debt swaps and all that. The government bailed them out. So if it's a major insurer, they're not going to let them go belly up.
Gotcha. Thank you. My second question is on 1031 exchanging. How would you position a 1031 exchange today if you want to get into commercial real estate based on what's going on with the rates and what's going on right now? Would you move forward on that, or would you wait based on what's going on?
Exchanging in or exchanging out?
Exchanging out.
Okay, so you have a commercial property, you're considering selling it and doing an exchange. And the question is, would you do
Right.
it now or would you wait?
That's one, and how would you position it if you were gonna do that? Yeah,
I would look at the question is like, if you exchange out of it today, number one, what are you going to exchange into? And then B, if you can't find anything that's better to exchange into, what are your options today? Because if you're talking about an apartment loan, chances are you have a prepayment penalty. So if you're at a position right now where your loan is coming up, it's ballooning, and you're trying to decide if you want a 1031 exchange out of whatever commercial property you're in, you have to look at, okay, if I can't find a property to exchange into that makes sense for me, what are my options to stay in the current deal? Is it cash flowing very well right now? And if my interest rate goes up, potentially doubles, depending on when you got the initial loan, am I still going to be okay if I refinance this property and maybe hold it for a longer period of time? Because values will probably still continue to go up. It's going to slow down compared to what it has been doing the last 10 or 12 years, but they're still in a strong position with apartments. We're still well behind the number of units that we need in certain areas around the country. But right, it's always a side-by-side comparison. If you did exchange out, can you get better returns on that other property? So that's what I would look at, is keeping it getting better returns, or is transferring out of it to something else getting better returns? Are you talking about just selling it completely?
yeah, just selling off a price of properties that I have and getting into a larger asset class of commercial. So that was the question.
Okay, so you're talking about selling some smaller properties and then maybe taking a couple of those and doing a 1031 exchange into a larger property.
Correct. Yeah.
Same thing, right? You have to look at what kind of returns you're getting now.
Right,
And if you
of
do
course.
sell these properties, how much money you're going to be able to get out after closing costs in order to transfer into another property? And are your returns going to be better?
And man, that's going to be an interesting timing issue. If I have,
That's really I had that question. Exactly.
well, just
Well, from the
just
timing
for the,
perspective, if you can find a replacement property that you like, David, you might give serious consideration to trying to position yourself, and maybe you're already comfortable positioning yourself doing what's called a reverse 1031. Finding your replacement property, identifying your replacement property, and going down that path. And if your stars are really in alignment, get your replacement property lined up before you've got a taker for your other property, and hopefully you can close them both at once.
well, what I'm picturing is he's going to sell 10 single family homes to exchange into one bigger building, and aligning the 45-day identification periods and the 180-day closing period. I would be very tempted, if I found something I like, to either close it and do a 1031 exchange, or get an option on it that allowed you to control when you closed that one relative to when your other properties closed.
Yeah, on Steve's comment about the reverse, in a hot market, I like that much better, only because you're really, if you think about it, if it's hot market, I'm going to be able to sell my properties, right? No problem. I probably list them, they sell quickly. The question is always finding the next property, and you got to identify in 45 days or one of 3 properties, and there's some ways you can do more, but it doesn't really work too well. But anyway, to do that, it becomes, it's very tough. So if you can find that property, lock it up through some things that Venus sharing, I think that's the way to go, because then you can sell your property very quickly within that 180 days, and you'd be in good shape.
Yeah, that's kind of the situation. Exactly. I want to look for something that's like exchangeable there, and going the other way first. So yeah, I appreciate it.
We have 144 unit that I've got lots of offers on, that Vina made a comment about my offer I was given. My wife was not too happy about it, but the problem
Don't
was,
send beautiful women in low-cut dresses and mini skirts to the houses of sellers who haven't responded to your mail, and then tell the wife that you're there to see Scott and you're a work colleague, when the wife actually works with Scott and knows you're not a work colleague.
and when she says we have a relationship, And then your wife, while you're in Denver, your wife's calling me up saying, who is such and such? And I go, oh yeah, that's such and such. And so now our joke is every time I get a piece of mail or a gift that's dropped by, I just say it's from my girlfriend. But my problem was with the 44, I didn't even, even if I sold at 1031, what was I going to buy? Somewhat to Anthony's comment, what am I going to buy? So I know what I've got. Because I've had it for 22 years. So the question, it was one of the first ones I bought, and I'm like, I know what I've got, and everything's too high. I can sell high, that's awesome, but what do I have to do? Everything I buy is going to be buying high unless I can find a value proposition, and that is tough to do in a hot market.
Okay, we have a question from Matt and then from Mark.
Okay, this question is for Suzanne and for Steve and anyone else that may have experience with storage. And my question is, how do you do a realistic assessment, especially in this market, of the income potential of a self-storage facility that you're evaluating and underwriting, particularly one that may have under market rents, may not be operated anywhere near the better operating facilities in a given market? I keep reading these anecdotal stories about some markets where, due to development, there's significant oversupply of units and rents might be flat or falling, and other situations where institutional investors have bought up many of the units in a given market and have repeatedly raised rents so quickly that people aren't sure what the rents are.
So you're asking how, if you're then looking at evaluating a property, how you're going to know if the under market rents what they should be? Is that what you're asking?
I think maybe
Yeah, and
straight up,
are they
what should
truly
the
under
rents
market?
be? Straight.
You have to understand that particular market, and it does vary from location to location. So although like Greenville in particular is oversaturated, so the prices went down. But 15 miles away, the smaller towns were not oversaturated because the big REITs didn't come in and build it up. So those rates can still go up. So you really have to look at within a 1 to 3 mile radius of that location, and you got to call and you got to see what's available and what the current rates are. And when I'm looking at offering, I'm not gambling in Vegas. So I offer on what the current rate is. And then I know in my mind, that it could go up, but I'm not buying on what it might be. I'm buying it on what it is now. So, too many people, when they're trying to sell their storage, they're like, well, the rates could be, another $4,000 a month gross. Well, that's great. If it really could, and you want that money, you need to raise the rents and then sell it. So you got to, in my opinion, when you're evaluating a property, you're evaluating it as it is right now. And then if I'm thinking that there's value add to it because of rents, then that's going to be something I'm taking on. And I'm expecting that I'm going to have some occupancy issues when I increase the rents. And I have to know if there is room to increase them, and there might not be. You're very right in that, Matt, that some places it's actually dropping. But I don't think if you're buying a property that doesn't come into the price. That may come into your interest in buying it, but when you're looking at your purchase price, it's what it is today. It's what the current income is in that property and the trailing 12 months.
If it makes you feel any better, sellers do the same thing in single family homes.
Oh yeah, they do.
It's only rented for $575 a month, but you could raise the rents, really? Then
Right.
why haven't you?
Yeah, it's nice
Right.
to know it's not just apartments, but it's storage that they do. The sellers do the same thing too about,
Yes.
oh, but once you buy it, you can do this. It's like, well, why aren't you doing that now?
Right.
And office and retail and every other asset class, hotel rooms, it's the same story all the way across the board. I agree with everything that Suzanne said, but I would expand that search ring out to 5 miles, and I would even take a look at 10 if you're wondering what's going on in the marketplace, and especially if you're looking at a rural, not an urban property. And then the other thing that I've gotten in the habit of doing is if I'm going down on the path seriously enough on something, I'm going to send out the Freedom of Information form to the municipalities that are within the market for a particular property. And I'm going to ask if there's anything in the pipeline that I can't even see yet. And I
talking
find
about in
most
terms of
municipalities are happy to answer that question.
You're talking about for zoning or new construction, or are you talking
Yeah,
about new
is there
regulation?
any new product in the works that hasn't broke ground and I can't see it yet? You know, you can get that information from the services in your urban markets, but you can't find that in rural. You gotta turn those rocks over yourself.
Correct.
So find out about things like permits issued for the development of new storage or the renovation of existing storage facilities.
I go farther and I ask if there have been any inquiries from anybody. I was just at a self-storage Zoom this morning, and the guy, the second lead on the self-storage thing this morning said, I got to wrap this up. I've got to Zoom with the city. We're in the preliminary conversation. So far, they like everything that I'm doing. He hasn't made any application. He doesn't own the property. He hasn't gone through any of the official channels that are documented yet. So you can't just ask if there's permits. You have to ask if there have been any inquiries, if anybody has any knowledge of anything whatsoever. Asking for permits. It's just another 60, 90 days behind that inquiry.
I think it's an interesting lesson to everybody who's listening, and because they are interested in getting into some kind of commercial property instead of like actually in it right now, that you guys both referred to these pro forma numbers that whether the property's listed or you're talking to the seller, they will often give you numbers that are based on what will happen after you buy it and put another X hundreds of thousands of dollars into it. And I see people actually buying properties based on those pro forma numbers. In other words, they're saying, well, look, you know, the rents could be $30,000 a month and the expenses could be cut down to only $10,000 a month. And therefore the realtor says it's worth up here. And so now I'm looking for money to buy it up here. And I hope you all just heard loud and clear from all these folks that you do not buy based on the pro forma. And Suzanne specifically said, I like this. It might make me more interested in buying it, but it's not going to affect what I'm paying for it.
Right. And in self-storage, the insurance rates and taxes are going to go up significantly because you're going to be paying a lot more than it's currently tax assessed for. And insurance in general in self-storage, I don't know about the other areas that you guys are in, but in self-storage, insurance has gone through the roof in the last year and a half. So whatever the insurance company, the current owner has, you know, I mean, they're going to put those costs down on the pro forma, but you've got to expect that they're going to go up significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, that's the insurance costs have gone through the roof on every asset class. Look at your car insurance bill.
All right, Mark and then Wilson.
Good evening, everyone. And hello, Anthony, a long time no see. I just had a comment or a potential suggestion for David in his question a few minutes ago about, you know, combining the equity and 1031ing into a commercial property. You know, I have a friend in Dayton that he did something similar, but what he did is he took a commercial line of credit and either refinanced it with a single loan or took a commercial line of credit on a number of single family properties. I believe it was 7 or 8 properties, freed up some cash. He may have only gotten 60 or 70 LTV on it, but it did allow him to free up enough cash to go buy an apartment building and still keep the properties and not have some of the cap gains issues and the need for the 1031. So just want to throw that out as a potential suggestion for David. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Wilson and then Sandy.
Okay, before my question, I just want to say this is some really good stuff, man. You know, what Steve just said about going to the city and like pulling up the rug before the rocks even start turning over, that's like genius. Nobody does that kind of stuff. Nobody even thinks like that. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, my question is for Suzanne. Are you working with like the mom and pop self-storage people or that type of thing? And the reason I'm asking is a friend of mine, you may have crossed paths with Stacey Rossetti. And when she was starting, one of the problems that she had was you deal with the mom and pop guys, they don't often keep good records. So, you know, if you're coming in wanting to determine what the value is and what you can rent them for, how do you compensate for that? What did you do if those are the type that you deal with to actually determine whether it even makes sense to buy it? Or did you just bank on the fact that since it was a mom and pop seller, you could get the kind of terms that you wanted to compensate for however off you might be on your evaluation, if that makes sense?
I suspect that every one of these panelists in whatever their asset class is has dealt with that mom and pop seller whose idea of keeping records was, well, I wrote down what everybody paid me on this sheet of paper last year, and here it is. I'm laughing because I was looking at a small trailer park, and it was actually listed with a real estate agent. And I said, I kind of need the income and expense statement to know if you're asking prices. And she literally took a photo of a piece of yellow lined paper that had the income and expenses written down on it. And that was the.
Yep.
Yeah.
Holy grail.
Yep.
You know, buying from the RTC, I got less than that. Literally on an office building in Fort Myers, Florida, the Terraces office building in Fort Myers, Florida, could not get any information out of the government representatives. Flew down there and went knocking door to door on offices, asking anybody to tell me what they're paying rent in that market.
Wow.
I had information. Nobody else did that. We were the winning bidder because we could afford to bid on that property because we got the information we needed to do that deal. Door to door, parked the rented car and went door to door in office complexes.
Wow.
So Suzanne, do you deal with the mom and pops, and how do you deal with their lack of information about what the property is actually making?
Well, the lack of information, I mean, if you do your due diligence, you're going to be able to figure out. You can walk around the facility and figure out, how many are red locked, how many are
That's been muted.
are not. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're good. Sam apparently has gone deaf.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell vacant units, overlocked units. I was looking at a property in North Carolina, and they said they were 95% occupied, but yet I went and probably a third of them didn't even have doors on them. So clearly they weren't 95% occupied. So some of it is just literally walking around and writing down units and how many have locks on them and how many are overlocked and that kind of thing. You can figure out rents from facilities in the area, and then a lot of the mom and pops are just so have so many capital expenditures that are needed because they've been no deferred maintenance done. So you have to correctly identify those kind of expenses that they're not going to be on the yellow sheet because they don't write those down. And then of course they already mow their own lawn and they do all those kind of things. So you still have to figure in the real costs of when you're running it the way you're going to run it at the income that it's coming in at. So that's kind of the, on the pro forma, it's going to tell you what they hope the income could be, and then the lowest costs that, expenses, which aren't real. So you have to look at the reality of both situations. And then the biggest problem that I think you face with the mom and pop no real numbers is if you're going to get it financed from a bank and the bank wants to see the past 2 years of income, that's where you're going to have the problem. So the financing situation based on who you're going to get the money from is where I've seen the biggest problem with the mom and pop things. But you're also going to have the biggest return possibilities on those poorly managed properties from the mom and pops. So there's a lot of upside to those.
And Suzanne, is that your area of specialty, or do you deal with a higher, I don't want to insult anybody, but a higher class unit or a higher quality?
We're looking for value add, so it doesn't have to be mom and pops, but I'm not looking to buy something that's just, you know, like at a 5 cap or something that other, you know, investors, I don't know, that just want to walk in and have it turnkey. I'm looking for a value add in some way. It doesn't have to be a mom and pop, but there has to be a value add to make sense for what I'm doing.
By the way, one of the rules we have here is nobody's allowed to be confused. So if anybody needs to throw a jargon flag at any point in time about things like, we keep throwing out stuff like, oh, 5 cap and pro forma, and if there's any of that, you're not following the conversation because everybody's speaking jargon, put it in the chat, ask about it. That's how we learn, is by, because sometimes I would try and look this stuff up and then I didn't even know how to spell it. So I couldn't find out what it meant because I was misspelling it. So yeah, feel free to ask questions, everybody. Sandy and then Jonathan.
I have 2 questions too. One of them is about, I bought my 12 unit. I also have another lot with it. And I talked to the city about what I can do with it. And one of the things I can do is storage units there. I can build that or apartments, put solar panels, whatever I want to, pretty much. So what my question is with the building cost and how much everything is that something that is a good idea at this point in time, or is it better to try to find the mom and pop ones that are already established?
How big is this extra lot?
It's the same size as my 12 unit. It's a pretty good size lot.
Like an acre or half an acre? How big is it?
It's probably about a half acre maybe, or just a little bit than that.
Can she build a big enough self-storage unit on that to make it worth it, Suzanne?
I would say it would depend on the location. I mean, if you were downtown in a city and you're doing, you know, multi-story climate controlled, sure. But just a regular drive up, I don't think a half acre would be big enough to make it worth your time on just managing it even.
This one is in one of those areas where when I had to find a storage unit, I had to go more than 15 miles away to find something. Oh, it's like, it was available. There are other storage units, like one that's right off the highway, but it was completely full. They sent me to one of their lots that was that far away, and that was the closest I could find.
So there's probably a real need for storage there. I just don't know that a half acre is going to be big enough and have enough units to warrant the time of managing it, you know, because managing 50 units and managing 250 units takes almost the same amount of time. So
now what if I could double that size, because the lot right beside it is from the township, which is, they're in the process of moving. So they're going to put that up from sale, and then I'll have the entire block.
So, you know, maybe something to consider. You can, you just have to do kind of a layout. I mean, you could spend a lot of money and have a civil engineer do it, but you'd have to kind of do a layout of how much land you actually have, how much of it is buildable, you know, setbacks and that kind of thing. And then, you know, figure out how many units you could get on it. And then you would just have to look at the cost per square foot of whatever you're building. And then versus what you can rent them for, what the price per square foot of rental in that area is, to see if it makes sense.
Okay, the other side of that is if it wasn't a storage unit, if I built more apartments, I can go, you know, more than 2 or 3 stories high. The only thing, I have to have a certain amount of parking spots per apartment. I have to have one for every apartment. So with that extra lot, I could use that for the parking and be able to design it on that lot to do it that way. So I don't know if that would be a better option than the storage unit.
So Sandy, I think what you need to do is actually do your own pro forma basically for
Right.
each of the different types of investments. And you're going to
Okay.
have to do what Suzanne said is you're going to have to lay out, just do a sketch. Don't pay engineers or anything. You don't own the property or anything yet, but do the research with the city of setbacks and things like that, and then draw something out. And you can, I mean, she's right. If you do climate control, I'm not a storage person, but we have just up the road from us, they built on probably a half acre. It's a 4-story, climate controlled, and my mom rented one of their spaces. I mean, they obviously knew in the area, but they're renting them up. But you have to run your numbers, and you have to lay out and run your numbers of both scenarios, see which one's most profitable.
Okay, at this point, I just looked into the ones that you can drop on to the property. I have to put mats down and gravel it, and then you just drop them in. But yeah, thank you very much. I definitely appreciate that.
So Sandy, a couple of things. For one, if you can get away with just putting some gravel down, there's some a number of different instant storage configurations that you can put up. One of the manufacturers called Boxwell will literally lease you
Yes, because I looked into
pre-made
it.
storage units, and you could test drive the market. But so there's a lot of different things that you could do that way. There's also guys all over the country that sell shipping containers converted to self-storage. And those can be dropped just about anywhere. So if the city's going to let you put gravel down, and a solid gravel base, obviously, and then put storage on top of that, I mean, you really have some cheap and fast options available to you. But what I suggest you do is there's a bunch of self-storage groups on Facebook. There's lots of people that will be happy to point you in the direction and give you a lot of the information you need to get started down that path. But keep in mind, there's also a lot of people on Facebook that are going to give you a lot of really bad information. So make sure you separate the good ones from the bad ones as best you can.
For sure. Thank you very much.
All right, Jonathan.
Hey everybody, pretty cool thing that we got going on here. So my question is, back to Suzanne to beat the pro forma of the dead horse again. Is it considered a normal procedure at all to also argue down the NOI based on not just current expenses, but such as, property taxes that are going to be reassessed, insurances that are going up, new contracts that are going to have to be signed? When you guys are going to back to those deal tables to negotiate, is that a normal procedure to try to drive those down, or does it usually fall on deaf ears?
My experience is it depends a lot on the listing agent. If you're just talking to the actual owners, if you've reached out and through marketing or talking to the owners and they're the mom and pa and they don't, they're negotiating with you. Yeah, I mean, they probably haven't even thought of the fact that the taxes are going to go up because they're reassessed. So some of that's just educating, and I'm not going in confrontational, but just saying, look, it has to make sense for me. And when I buy it, these things change, and talking through it more from an educational standpoint than argumentative, like, this is just crazy. Then it's all part of the negotiation. It has to make sense. The harder part is when you're dealing with if it's a listing agent on a property, they've come up with a pro forma. They're the ones that created it. So they don't want to be told they're wrong. So, having to get them to realize that, yeah, you don't really know the tax structure here. You don't understand what, things are going to go up to, is very real. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and more so towards the brokers is the question also, because from what I've seen, sometimes it's kind of a game. It's like they put these pro formas out just to see like who's the serious folks that are playing here and who are the tire kickers, and then who, maybe they can get one on over someone. And so I always wonder is like, hey, when you go back to these brokers, like these are real numbers, and like, you got me. Yeah, those are real numbers.
Well, for any of you who deal with any kind of commercial property, do you even bother, or you just put forward your offer without an argument? Just like, I see what you're saying, but here's what I can pay.
Now we're gonna run numbers.
I know, but I'm talking about in dealing with the brokers.
No, you don't tell them they're wrong. You just say, this is what I can pay. And if, I mean, that's what we do. I'm not going to go through and tell them all their numbers and the pro forma are wrong. I'm saying we've run our numbers and this is what we offer. And in our experience, the broker is much more interested in our offer when that facility has sat on the market a long time, because they've inflated the pro forma. So then all of a sudden they're interested because they haven't been able to bring an offer to the seller. And then they're more open to your reasoning, because they're going to have to present your offer to the seller. So if you can explain where that offer came from in a way that they can present it to the seller, and the seller's going to be open to it, then your chances are better.
And Anthony, I'm gonna ask you to answer the same question, because I'm guessing you probably evaluate 20 or 30 properties for every one that you go, well, now that one's interesting. Do you bother to make offers on the ones that are crazy high? Do you go ahead and make the offer you can make? Do you move on? How do you handle that?
Yeah, we make the offer anyway. And one of the things that we'll do, though, is we'll have a conversation with the broker. And based on the information that they provide to us, sometimes they can give us good detailed information. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes we only get the NOI and what they're supposedly getting for rent today, or what they say they're getting today. Sometimes we found out that the rent that they say they're getting today is the pro forma numbers that we can get after the fact. But we'll take whatever they give us, we'll run the numbers, and then we'll have a conversation with the broker and say, look, I know your seller's asking $4.5 million for this property, but after running it through our underwriting, it looks like it's only worth 3.7. And we'll get one of two responses. Most of the time we get a response of, well, the seller's already turned down offers at 4.4 and under, so you got to come around 4.4 or higher, or they're just going to immediately discount it and not even bother to reply. And to which I tell myself and my students, I tell them, look, you still need to put in the offer, because in most states, when you put in a bona fide written offer, they're required to give that to the seller. Now, there are some states out there that have enacted other laws that state if the seller gives the broker written instructions and says, do not share any offers below $4.4 million with me, then they don't have to. Florida is one of those states. I'm sure there's probably a few more that have enacted that, but that's one of the regulations. If you're a realtor in the state of Florida, you have written instructions from the seller, you don't have to even submit offers. I do believe, though, that if the broker does present the offer, we also, with the offer, we put on, just like Suzanne said, we put on a cover letter that explains why we think it's only worth 3.7 to us. Hopefully that convinces them to take our offer. And of course, if other people, and we also run into this too, where they basically turn down our offer and say, well, yeah, the seller got not only a full price offer, but a couple offers higher than full price. And it's like, what are they looking at? So there are people out there that teach students and investors just to put in a full price offer or above full price offer, because once you get it under contract, now you can go back and beat them up and tell them, oh, well, now that we've got into it, it's only worth 3.7. I've also had brokers that I said, it looks like it's only worth 3.7, say, yeah, that sounds about right. And it's like, well, wait a second, you listed it for 4.5. And they said, yeah. It's like, okay, but you just said you think it's worth 3.7. So why did you list it for 3.5? And their answer is typically, because that's what the seller wants.
That's what got me the listing.
Yeah, that's what the seller wanted. The seller wants 4.5. And it's like, okay, well, I can only put an offer for 3.7, and I would still put in the offer. Even if a broker tells me, oh, the sellers turned down offers at 4.4 and 4.3, still put in the offer, because if you don't, then they have no requirement to even tell the seller that somebody made them an offer at 3.7.
You know, I'm licensed in the state of Illinois for 35 plus years now, and the state of Illinois is one of the states that has that ability for a seller to say, I don't want to see any offers that don't meet this, that, or whatever criteria. I don't do a lot of brokerage business, But in 35 plus years, I've never, ever heard of a seller actually saying, I don't want to see those offers. You're absolutely right, but I've never heard of it actually happening.
Okay, I'm going to take another one of the questions that was pre-submitted. I think this one is probably a Steve Stackman question, although maybe somebody else in the general group might have an answer to this. I have what I think is a very good opportunity, and I'm very interested in pursuing it. It's 5 acres of land along a state route in Ohio in a rural area. The owner not only is willing to finance it, she's anxious to finance it at $100,000. The problem is it has an abandoned restaurant that the owner used to run, an abandoned car lot that the owner used to run, and a 1.5 acre farm. And I have no idea how to evaluate it or what to plan to use it for. There's no income, and of course there are no comps. What do I do?
For me, right?
Send it to Steve.
I would think that's probably your bailiwick
Smollen.
there, Steve.
Steve Smollen.
Yeah, I would say that what I would be looking for is it's along a state route. Well, there are state routes that are very small. So what's the traffic? What's your 135 radius? What is it you think you're going to do with this property?
Wait, jargon flag. What's a 135 radius?
Sorry. We talked about it earlier, actually. So it's 1 mile. What the residents are in the 1 mile radius of the location, 3 mile radius, and 5 mile radius. So you're looking at what the demographics are, who's there, what kind of competition there is, because that's where your customer base typically will be coming from. So self-storage, that's the big thing in self-storage. Laundromats is a big thing. Anything that people want to get to quickly and conveniently, 135 is the hallmark. Now, and I think Steve even mentioned, especially in rural areas, you can't really look at a 1 because you may have 4 people living 1 mile away from your property. So you have to take it out to maybe 10. But generally, that's the rule of thumb, is the 135.
So
I guess,
in all likelihood, whatever that study comes up with, what's there now is going to be scraped, right? Because those were businesses that the owner ran, and it's probably going to be difficult to find somebody who wants to come and run
right,
the restaurant or the car lot.
right. Unless you
Probably
just,
going to be scraped.
yeah, unless you just have a desire to run a restaurant, that's what it's going to be. Now you could look at what's missing in that area. It's just like looking at what does this area, this 135, 10 mile zone need? Does it need self-storage? Does it need a car wash? Does it need a car lot? Does it need? So you're going to have to find that before you can figure out anything about the value. Raw, I would probably only value it at raw land. And if it's, I believe you said it was up by Lima in Allglaze County. And
Yeah.
I graduated from Indian Lake High School, so I hung out. Look, we have a puppy. Hello, puppy.
Yeah, a puppy that's bigger than he is.
So I hung out in Lima quite a bit, and most of that is very rural area. So that's farmland. It's going to be several $1,000s an acre. $100,000. I don't know, without seeing it and knowing more about it. I don't, unless there's something specific that they know is going on there. I'd want to get a much better deal on that.
I have two very specific concerns beyond what Steve mentioned there. Yeah, it's vacant land, less the demolition costs, demolition and haul away. And haul away and dumping is becoming increasingly expensive all over the country. You can't just put that out on the corner of the garbage and mix up. You got special waste there, particularly the old building probably has some environmental issues. And then you had a car lot there. Chances are they do have some environmental issues that I'm going to be concerned about as well. So again, I go back to the Freedom of Information Act, and I'd be sending the local fire marshal and the local county, whatever level they have of an EPA, and asking if they know anything. You know, the most underutilized thing in buying real estate is the Freedom of Information Act. You can get so much information for free if you just ask. And you can really save yourself from a world of hurt and headache and expense by asking.
If you're looking at a gas station, if you're looking at a car lot, if you're looking at things that have oil or gas, you want to contact the OEPA, that's Ohio EPA, and they will have issued or should have issued something called an NFA. It's a no further action letter. So that means they've looked at the site. They're not going to require any further remediation. Everything's fine. I looked at
Farmers use chemicals.
Chemicals, yeah. Oh yeah,
Farmers change their old oil, and we probably all know one of our old grandparents or somebody that used to change the oil in the garage and just go pour it out back.
Yep. I looked at a gas station. They could not find an NFA. The agent insisted those tanks had been taken away. I said, until you have an NFA, I'm not interested, because it could be $5,000 to clean that up, or it could be $500,000. I'm not taking that risk.
I had an organization I had who they bought tax liens, and they bought a $60,000 tax lien on this property. And then when they bought it without checking any of the title stuff, and they came back and the EPA found out they owned it, and they said, "Oh, great, we're glad or there was an EPA lien on there." So they called the EPA wanting to know what it was about, and they go, "Oh, we're glad you bought it. $2 million to clean this thing up." They decided to walk away from their $60,000 tax lien. That was a waste. So you really, Steve is right. You have to do your research, because that environmental will kill you.
Yeah, dry cleaners, that's another category, if there's ever been a dry cleaner in the building.
But
we saw the white soil cleaning trailer behind a shopping center near where I used to live years back. That trailer was out there cleaning soil for over a year. I couldn't figure out what was taking so long, but that thing was out there for over a year.
But I think one of the panelists said, if you're going to buy this thing, what can it be used for? So I don't necessarily write it off, but I think you need to think through. I mean, if what's the loan payment going to be? What are the cost of demo? Whatever you have to do, but is there something you could do with it that would make money? It may not be, I'm not going to turn you into Bill Gates or anybody, but it could be a nice investment. You could turn into something, but you've got to be creative about that.
Yeah, there have been a couple of good suggestions in the chat around the idea of how many truckers might live out there, because you can actually charge people to park their semis when they're not using them, and that can be extremely profitable with very little. I mean, you scrape the lot, you throw down gravel, you draw lines, you charge people to park their semis. Okay, we've got Stephen and Wilson, and then I think we're going to be out of time. Stephen.
Yes, I was just asking, is there a way that we can get a copy of this recording today, and then the contacts of the people that was talking today?
Well, I'm pretty sure that we send recordings out on these to everybody who came or who signed up. We'll see who's willing to give out their contact information at the end, because not everybody's open to just randomly giving out their phone numbers, but I'll tell you what, panelists, if you're willing to give out contact information, put it in the chat. How about that? Wilson.
My question is for Anthony. So how do you actually verify when they're supposed to submit the offer to the seller that they actually did it? How do you do that?
Great question. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes what we've done is once we've submitted the offer, especially if we either don't hear back from the agent, or he does call back right away and says, yep, they just immediately rejected it. We ask them for a counter offer, because most of the time, if you really want to sell, you're going to counter offer. even if you counter offer at 4.4, you're asking 4.5, we offer 3.7, you'd expect them to at least counter offer at 4.4. There's been a lot of times they just say, you know what? The offer was so low, the seller's not even gonna bother to counter. One of the things that we've done is we've then sent the cover letter and the LOI, the letter of intent, through the mail directly to the seller. So if we can find that information on public records, we can send it directly to the seller. We are not violating any type of ethics or laws because the seller has an agent, because we're not licensed agents. So another licensed agent is not supposed to go around the listing agent and contact the seller directly. We're not held to that because we don't have licenses. So we can go directly to the seller. And if the seller's interested, they can pick up the phone and call you back or just ignore it.
Let me add a slight subtlety there, Anthony. You're not trying to cut the agent out of his commission when you do this. That becomes problematic. If you go straight to a seller on a listed property and you start having discussions about, well, how do we like make this happen just between you and me, and no agents, particularly in multi-million-dollar commercial properties, are going to get a little bit prickly about that. And there's actually a legal term for it, which is tortious interference with contract. And you will lose that case if you try to do that. So that Anthony's goal is just to make sure the seller got the offer, not to try and cut out the agent.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, we'll tell them in there that, hey, we submitted this offer through your agent. We're kind of surprised that you didn't at least counter offer, but just in case, here's the information again. We're still interested in the property. If something has changed, please keep us in mind. And that's pretty much it. It's very rare for me to get a call back from the seller directly. I have had agents call me back a year and a half after I've made offers asking me if I'm still interested in the property.
Wow.
Because they weren't able to sell it for a year and a half. And so I always tell them, it's like, yeah, I'm interested. Send me the revised numbers and I'll take a look at it again.
I had one quick question for the other Steve that was talking about the 135. In the demographic, Steve, are you also looking at the median area income or the area income where you're doing the research? And does it have to be a certain limit amount depending on what it is you want to do? Would that make sense? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with what the business is. So my car washes, I'm looking for one in the 1-3 area, that 1 mile specifically. I don't really care about the income because my self-serve car wash has people coming in with Corvettes and Porsches, as well as the beaters with heaters that are, I'm not sure how they're driving. Because those people want to take care of their cars. So I'm looking for numbers of people. How many rooftops do I have? What's the density? How many other car washes are within that 5-mile radius? For a laundromat, strangely enough, I might be looking for a certain income level, but I'm also looking for apartments.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Anthony won't like me saying this, but generally speaking, apartment dwellers hate their laundry room. So they will literally come over to a laundromat and wash everything and then go back. So I want to be close to apartments more so than single family houses. And that can be even luxury apartments if they don't have a lot of the luxury ones now. I'm sure Anthony knows this and can verify they have built-in laundry in each unit. So that's a little bit different, but those older 60s, 70s apartment buildings, they had laundry rooms and nobody felt comfortable there.
You said that, and it threw me back to college, where I actually lived in a very nice but college apartment complex, and I never went to the freaking laundry room after the first time, because not only was it cobwebby and spidery, but people would just leave their laundry and you didn't know whether you could like take it out because and then I think I did take it out and I got a nasty note on my door from one of my neighbors about how dare you remove my laundry that has been sitting in the dryer for 2 days kind of thing. So yeah, I get that.
Wow.
All right, Maria, we have about 5 minutes to get the question asked and answered. You are mysteriously muted. I see that your microphone is on, but we cannot hear you.
It doesn't look like she's going anywhere either. She's been walking for 10 minutes.
Well, it's Suzanne that's walking.
Suzanne.
Maria is,
Oh,
No.
Maria, sorry.
we cannot hear you, Maria. Like nothing, not a peep.
Suzanne's a smart one. She's getting the exercise.
Okay, when we
while
don't speak sign language, it was a good try though.
You could chat your question real quick, maybe, if you can
Yeah.
chat it.
All right. In the meantime, does anybody have any quick wrap-up questions?
I'm curious from the other people here on the call. Yeah, in apartments and stuff like that, are a lot of listings coming out that just say market price, or is that just in self-storage? That the listing agent won't even put a price, they just put market price and they don't do the math. I mean, it drives me nuts.
Yes.
Yeah, they want an offer. They don't want to put up that number out there.
I know,
What?
but come on. What else? What's your job? You're the listing agent. Like, do the dang math.
I
that
think
actually is a market strategy listing. And the idea, the concept is, and yes, by the way, it is happening in other asset classes as well. The concept is I'm willing to sell my property, but I'm not going to start the process by negotiating against myself by saying what I might be willing to take. You tell me what you're willing to pay for your property. Now, I'm not crazy about that strategy, and it took me a while to make sense out of it. But actually, in a hot market, when people are overpaying for things, it actually does make some sense.
I have seen it in not distressed property. You've got a great building, it's full, and you're like, let's throw it out there, and all offers in by May 5th. Your best offer, and then but the distressed stuff, you're like, hey, $2 million, we're gonna want to sell it, and maybe you have a better chance of, because I don't know, that's what I've seen in the hot markets. It's everybody get their offers in.
Can you imagine doing that in single family homes?
I was just going to say, we went and looked at a house a couple of weeks ago because my wife and I would like to move. The realtor of a house that we liked admitted that the house was intentionally underpriced. And we saw it on a Friday, and she said, we're having open houses Saturday, we're having open houses Sunday, best and final by Monday, and by Tuesday it was in contract. And
Well,
it did sell for 50,000 more than asking.
Yeah, that's been going on for 5 or 6 years in the residential market, but I was just thinking I should just list every property I own on MLS and just leave it up, just like no expiration date. And anytime anybody wants to come and pay me twice what I think it's worth, I will happily sell it. And I would have every realtor in the city furious at me.
Everybody's got their price, right? They'll sell.
Yeah, I'm not married to any of this stuff. You can have the house I'm living in if you're willing to pay enough for it. I'll be out next weekend.
I mean, if you'll pay enough.
You've
for
gotten
mine,
offers
I'm
on that
willing-
house without it even being on the market.
I mean, if somebody comes offers me a price, even if I'm not going to 1031, if it's high enough, and I can write a big check to the IRS and still have a table piled with cash that I can, eat on.
Oh
I'm
my
good.
God. Is that
Scott, what if we have a certain
did I just hear
and
Pete
deliver the
Fortunato's
offer?
brain explode? Is
Mm-hmm.
that what that
Because
is that
I'm
what
willing
that
to pay
sounded
tax.
like?
Yeah. Pete will scold me later at the event. He'll scold me your the creative deal coming up.
You're in trouble this
Don't
week
say
for sure.
paying taxes voluntarily in front of Pete.
I
right.
know.
So this is Maria's question, and it's got to be a real quick answer from anybody who has an opinion. When purchasing a property, is it suggested that you use a trust, and is it a revocable trust? As I understand, you need an EIN number for an irrevocable trust.
You do need an EIN for an irrevocable trust. That means you've given to the trust and you have no rights to it. You've given up your rights to an irrevocable trust.
Her question is, should I be buying properties in a irrevocable trust?
I don't, the only reason I like them is potentially later on when you sell in the irrevocable trust, the capital gains on the irrevocable trust are not taxed until the beneficiaries take those capital gains out. That's the benefit of an irrevocable trust. So that to me is more at the end of your life, so to speak, because, or I'm 65, I'm ready to retire, I put it on an irrevocable trust. There's some guaranteed income for me for the rest of my life, but all the capital gains sit in there untaxed. But eventually, when my heirs get it, they're going to be taxed. So I'm not a big fan of it. But that's basically the only benefit I've really seen in those.
Okay.
It also
All
You
right.
really
is
need
good
to do
asset
some
protection
estate
'cause-
planning with somebody before
Yeah.
deciding which kind of trust that you want
Right.
to put your property into. Personally think, yeah, every property should go into a trust before the LLC.
Right.
But if you're considering an irrevocable trust, you really want to sit down with somebody that's going to thoroughly understand your long-term end-of-life plan before you should commit to that.
Exactly.
And she has a follow-up question about what is the best entity to buy a property in, and we've got 4 minutes left, so I'm not sure that that's a question that can be answered in this little bit of remaining time.
Well, I think number one, it's not one size fits all. So you want to talk to an asset protection attorney that does not have a dog in the hunt. In other words, they're not trying to sell you some other products or services, because it depends on your own particular needs and what you're buying and what you're trying to protect. So sometimes you want to buy things in trust. All of our properties we have are in LLCs, but again, one size doesn't fit all. So talk to a good asset protection attorney.
Every once in a while, you see something that makes sense to do in a C corporation, but that's rare. So if somebody tells you you get a C corp, you might want to double check that with somebody else, because I've seen.
Yeah,
people
when
try-
I say trust, I mean trust and then LLC.
Mhm.
Yeah, a trust is not really,
Just trust.
except an irrevocable, which doesn't protect against the other assets in the irrevocable trust. Trust is anonymity, and LLC, well, Corporate Transparency Act is questionable, but LLC is your asset protection. So you do want to have that at the, like Steve said, at the if you're going to do a land trust, then do a land trust and an LLC. But I agree too with Anthony. This all depends on everybody's personal situation. You can't, this group can't, we can give you some ideas, but we can't answer the question.
Okay. All right. Well, Scott, I probably should have checked with you before I said I was going to give away a couple of tickets to the OREA Summit, but you hadn't been here up until now, so I just did it and just
Oh,
realized I
Vina,
didn't ask the
Vina.
president of the group if I could do it first, but I'm committed now. So
That's
here we
right.
are. Matt hopefully
You know how
has.
famous Vina is for asking permission for doing things, particularly from people in authority.
I do ask your forgiveness though, Scott.
Yeah.
So Matt, did you run the registration list through the little, whatever that thing on the back end is that spits out a random name?
Yes, I did. However, they must be paying attention and present to win.
Yes. And whose random name did it spit out?
Jarrell Williams.
Jarrell, are you here? Jarrell
Let's see the
Williams.
participant list.
He's there,
He is there.
but he's got to either say I'm here or he's got to put in the chat I'm here.
Jarrell, you aren't taking a nap, are you? Been exciting speakers.
Did you happen to pick a second name, hun? Because Jarrell is
I certainly can.
going once.
I'm here.
Somebody
wait,
He's here.
there's
He's come
Jarrell.
back.
Jarrell,
Yes, sorry.
hey, you just won 2 VIP tickets to the National Summit.
Oh my goodness.
Where are you from?
Jacksonville, Florida.
Well, you should come up to
Nice.
Cincinnati.
Okay.
Yeah, in the winter.
October 31st, November 1st, 2nd, and that's not winter.
Yeah.
Remember to bring your costume. It's Halloween on the 31st.
It is Halloween. You can also attend virtually if you like, but you really should come up. We have a-
Yeah, you can hang out with Anthony and Steve and all these brilliant commercial investors and Suzanne, all these people. You should.
well, and
Sounds great.
and
I'm in.
900 other people in addition to that. It's just
Yeah.
being there in person is awesome because you would not believe the amount of deal making and relationship building and whatnot that just goes out in the hallways 24/7 for 4 solid days. It's a really, really amazing event. So we will grab actually, we probably already have your email address because you signed up for this. Bern, can you make sure that we have Jarrell's contact information so that we can get him registered and send him his confirmation and all the information?
Yes, miss.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we will see you here in Cincinnati, Jarrell, in October.
Thank
And
you. I appreciate that.
everybody else, oreaconvention.com is where you go to get your tickets before I start saying, guys, we're down to the last 15 seats, which is going to happen sooner than you think. And also they're super cheap right now. So you should just commit, sign up, pay your money, then you know you're coming. oreaconvention.com. All right, panelists, I appreciate you being here tonight. I know this was an entirely volunteer effort and you just did it tonight to give back to people, and I appreciate that. And I know everybody else does as well. And attendees, thanks for being here tonight. I know I learned some stuff. I hope you guys did too. And we will see you all again next month at our Summit Investor Help Night. Everybody have a great week. Happy investing. See some of you at Creative Finance Summit in 2 days.
Thank
Bye,
you.
y'all.
Thank you.